Wednesday, September 28th at 5:34 p.m. Welcome, everybody. If you have any hard time hearing me with the mask, just let me know and I will speak up. Especially if you have any difficulty hearing me or anybody else. You don't have to wear a mask. I'm just choosing to wear a mask. That's what I feel is right for me and our family. So just to make it clear. Let's start with the pledge. And Christine, would you mind leading?
Leading the pledge?
Yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from August 11th, 2021.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Great. Any conversation, comments?
No.
Calling the bat phone. Cindy, thank you. Cindy, getting up to speed quickly on all the intricacies of the budget committee. Okay, so all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstained?
Yeah, I'm gonna abstain because I wasn't.
Okay, I've been abstaining. Okay, thank you. Okay, Norm, we're gonna turn it over to you for the school district building and financial update.
Sure, Mark, thanks. First, I'll start with the building project. And first I want to say, hopefully by the next time I'm here, your phone will be ringing, I'm joking. Hopefully by the next time I'm here in October, I can say to the budget committee that the building project will be complete. We are right at the end of the project right now. What we're working on right now is finishing up the science lab over at the middle high school, which will be done by next week. We had a little bit of an issue finishing the expansion of the media center over at Maple Street, where we didn't have enough electricians come in, but that has been completed now, so our students can start using it. And we have finished everything that we needed to do for this project. The next big thing on this project that will happen is that we will be getting some money back on the project, in which Mike Flynn will be talking to his team about what additional resources they need potentially for this project. Talking to our fire chief, talking to the police chief, if it's something that they see during their inspection that they need that can be part of this building project, we want to get feedback from them, because it's important that we take this additional savings, put it back into the scope of the project. If it's additional work that needs to be done, that deferred maintenance or something that helps improve our schools for our students and for our staff, we want to do that. So we're at the finish line. It's definitely, we've met the needs of the taxpayers of everything that's been promised in the bond, and exceeded it more with deferred maintenance, fire suppression, fourth classroom. I could go all night for 3 hours on this with you guys, but I'm very happy to say that I'm hoping by October I can say we are complete. And the only thing that we will be working on specifically will be just checking off things that maybe they need to fix a doorknob or something, basically like a warranty, that they go back on a punch list that the leadership team comes up with, saying, hey, this outlet in this classroom is not working, it's faulty. And they just go through all the checks and balances on that. So that is the update from the building committee. We meet next week to go over the financials. I don't have an updated financials from that. I think the important thing for the budget committee for oversight is, once this is complete, the budget committee, once the board sees it, we'll get a complete overview of this whole project. So like the midterm report I gave you guys last year, where I gave you a complete analysis of everything that was spent, breakdown, what was completed. It'll be a pretty lengthy report that I'm excited to get at the end of this project, which will show the timeline of when these additional funds were released, when they were approved, when they went through the stages, and what was delivered and promised to the taxpayers.
Wonderful.
So if there's no questions about the update, I did want to hand out a couple of things to just show you guys real quick that I thought was very important to answer Mr. Houston's question. This Houston, Don. One of the things that was very important to the school district last year was we had some floods in the school district that there was a little bit of rooftop leaks where people were saying it was part of the facilities project. And as chair of the building committee, it was important for me to say, listen, we have delivered on what was promised to the towns on these roofs and that we are aware of the longevity of them. And so what was important is for us to produce a chart of each location of what has been completed in the building project and what we are going to have to look at for CIP. So this one's the high school. So everything in green was part of the facilities project. And then the red is, as you can see, will have required maintenance for 2027. This is something that's uploaded on our district website, which people will be able to go on there and see. But you can see that's the date of high school. This one is Maple Street. You're welcome. Again, the green is what was part of the facilities project that was promised to the taxpayers. And then the red is under investigation, Michelle informed me, on what is the longevity and when that needs to be done. And I'm hoping to have an answer from that once the research has been completed. And then this one is Harold Martin. So you can see our new kitchen. You can see a lot of the roofs were installed 2020, 2021 this year. And you can see that there was roofs installed in 2014, which is under warranty until 2034. So what's good about these three diagrams, it gives us basically a pinpoint of if there's a leak in a specific location of this project, we could go back to BPS and they will come out and fix it because there's a warranty on it. And that's one way of saying, hey, this is part of the project. We didn't have people not coming here, not knowing what they were doing. These, like I said, is on the website, and these are something that the CIP committee is going to be working on in order to invest into our schools and maintaining and understanding when we need to replace our roofs. So we're not looking at doing this through a bond in the future, in my opinion.
What is the warranty on the installed 2020 and 2021?
From my understanding, the warranty rate is either 10 or 20. I will clarify that with you. It's for 1 year right now for when they leave, and then it's parts after that in the labor we got to cover. So, but that's what I'll clarify that.
How is it that we don't know when the roofs on Maple Street were installed?
You're not alone. It's a very good question, and I'm not sure how I don't know how they don't know when they were installed. You think it'd be some type of invoice or something? I don't know, and that's something I would like to know about because we need to know, plan for it down the road. There's an issue, and that's something that is under investigation for them to find out. I think this was put together about 2 months ago. So since our former superintendent has left. This is something that I think we all get caught up to speed on and put together so we can plan for the future with it.
You have any idea, Norm, what the term roof is serviceable means?
Serviceable, like probably an access way to get up there is what I'm thinking about, because there's multiple, that's what my interpretation would be. So serviceable to get up there and be able to do the maintenance and whatnot, because there's certain ways to get up there.
Good diagrams.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's good to show the community what's been done and really just understanding and focus on CIP moving forward.
Thanks, Norm. That's very helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. And as soon as I hear some information about Maple Street roofs, I'll gladly bring it here. I just wanted to answer Don's question about the roofs and just communicate that we don't have any leaks. I'm really happy to hear that. And I'm ecstatic, and we had a lot of rain and there's been no issues. Of course, there's wear and tear on any roofs if that's been up for a while. It's just been really good. We're having no issues right now. Does anyone have any questions about the facilities project? That's probably my most knowledgeable thing. You know, we're at the finish line. It's very exciting to see the students in the classrooms and all that. Awesome. So the financial update. So this is probably not much to share. First off, I just want to say thank you to our leadership team, to our teachers, to our students who've had a great start to the school in the last week and a half. It's been great seeing them out and about, playing sports and just having a lot of fun, working together at a goal of 180 days. And just a huge thank you to everyone for making it a successful start to the year. I was informed from Michelle this week, actually, that there is no financial statements for July because things are encumbered in August. So what's been presented to the board, if anyone would like a copy of, is our quarterly reports that was submitted to the board a couple weeks ago.
That was the same report we saw.
Yeah, it's just detailed journal entries and stuff. Do you want to see if anyone wants a copy? Okay. Just printed them all out. Other than that, the plan is I'll probably begin financials in September, probably next week or our next board meeting, which I can bring to the budget committee. But things aren't there in the history of Michelle told me she's never had a July reports. And I did not realize that for last year's budget committee because we're trying to pass a budget, if you recall. So it was a little different that when it came to asking for them, I couldn't remember if we had seen them yet. So.
Okay. Great, I can.
Okay.
Get down there, Ken.
Great. Anything else, Norm?
No.
Probably good.
Actually, one last thing. Yeah. Last thing I want to just say is that we are starting our budgeting process in person, October. I highly recommend that the budget committee, if it has time to watch them online or come in person, they'll be very similar, in my opinion, to how the select board does it. The select board, I've watched their budgeting process. They have their department heads come in and justify or ask for why they need an increase. And based on Mike Flynn's discussion here, that will be the same way with our leadership team. They will come in, they will discuss their wants and their needs to the school board, and the school board will be asking questions. It's a very different process than the first 2 years on the board where I was handed a budget completed from the superintendent and had to make cuts. So in this situation, it's going to be very different. I'm excited to see it. Throughout that budgeting process, I will be bringing you feedback, discussions of what happens throughout the budgeting process, because together, having these discussions as they're going, I think is beneficial to both a budget committee that oversees our budget and to bring feedback to the school board before we can complete our budget. My understanding, we potentially would have a number the end of October, beginning of November, which definitely speeds up the budget committee's process significantly, which helps everyone that asks questions and, work better together. So, but I do encourage this committee to really watch those meetings, because there's gonna be a lot of questions that people are gonna be asking us that we're gonna be answering. I'm excited for that process. And that's all I have.
Do you envision the department heads presenting it to your board or to the principal?
No, so the principals like Amy Doyle, Bill, and all them, I assume Mandy will all be coming to the board, and they'll be discussing their budget, because they gave out their budget to their staff, and then they have to justify their cuts to what the superintendent recommended. And then the board will be presented with them talking about their budgets. And I think it's great, because I think instead of a superintendent, in my opinion, as a board member, for me, it's great to be able to hear from a leadership position on why they need an increase in their budget for their school. They're running the schools. They know what they need in order to justify running that school. And instead of a superintendent just saying, no, I mean, it is his job. He does run a district. I think it's great that we can have this discussion in public and we can all share an opinion on it and justify why we believe that we should have this 1% increase in this line item or something like that. We're going to have a new software based on Mike's discussion, which we approved in the unreserved fund balance for e-finance. So I'm very excited to see that software. As you know, we made, I think, a great attempt last year. I don't want to say attempt. I think we did a great job, in my opinion, of a different format that I thought was on the right path to what a lot of people have been asking for. And I'm excited to see the next step of communication and ways of providing that resource to the community.
Norm, you had asked me about, Norm and I just had a phone conversation about whether we should have additional budget committee meetings. I mean, I think that's what sort of the gist of it, or
Yeah.
how the budget committee could best engage in the school's budgeting process. And should there be anything different,
Yeah.
given the timeline and the process this year? So I just want to put that out there. We have a budget committee meeting scheduled second week of October, second week of November, and we can stick with that. And you can give us a progress report in mid-October.
Yep.
And then you may have a number in November. And then you invited people to obviously, listen on the meetings, which is fine. I wasn't sure if you were proposing anything further than that, Norm, or if anybody else in the budget committee wants to talk about that, the process and timeline, given what's going to be rather different with the school this year.
Where Norm was saying that the schools are doing so well and moving forward on their budget, I'd be glad to see that the schools will go before the town in the presentation. A real change, but think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, whatever. I mean, I'm only one guy, but I mean, I'm at the mercy of the budget committee. Yeah, and honestly, I'd have to check with Mike Flynn and the board. I mean, but again, it's about having the discussion, and I want the discussion to be full. I want the questions. I want, if we have a 2-month lead time on what normally the school board goes to, I'm happy if they all agree to go earlier. I just want us to be able to answer all your questions, and I just don't want us to have it be too soon that we forget. That's important to me. We crammed a lot in last year, but I thought it was okay. But I'm happy to think about that, or if this want that to be entertained, we can. I know we have, I'd actually have to mark that. Is that the discretion of the budget committee who goes first, or is that something the select board and the school board have to discuss at their joint meeting when they have that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in the sense we've just done, it's happened that way because this town has always been ready in advance of the school. So, I mean, from my standpoint, we have a lot of budgets to get through, and the first one that's ready, we should take it on. So if the school's going to be ready earlier, we should.
Maybe the schools,
Right.
from what Norm was saying.
Right.
Yeah.
If we're, maybe in mid-October when we meet, I'll have a better idea where we're at, and you'll have a better idea where you're at, and we should revisit it then.
Yeah, I'm excited. We have a whole new team doing this, with Delcy coming on, her working with Rob on a new finance committee. I'm excited, they're also working very hard on a new CIP, which they're working very closely with the town, Rob and her, and it's just a whole new process for us to work together, just to figure out what we need to do moving forward. As you know, we are also, what could be a little difficult, which I don't know when we're going to come to an agreement in negotiations. And that does have an impact, of course, on the budgeting process. So how we unpack that, there's certain steps in that, because we could have a finalized budget with a number, and we may not have finalized number if there's an agreement reached. Does that make sense? Because we all look at the total number impact. So we have a couple of variable areas where we gotta be cautious of for us to go first, and something's not complete. And that's something I just thought about right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to discuss, obviously the town is willing to go first again, as we have for as long as I've been here.
I would love to be the first to go first. It'd be great, but I'm happy. Let's see how we go. I mean, and we can work together, whatever works for the budget committee and the school district. and Michelle and Mike and the board. Happy to see what we can do.
Can you give us a feel as to where you are in the negotiation timeline?
No,
Has it started yet?
yeah, it is public knowledge that it has started, but I am not on the negotiation teams, and I can just confirm that they're in negotiation. Yeah. They prefer me on the budget committee than negotiation.
You're probably the one.
Okay,
Perfect.
anything else for Norm? Thank you, Norm.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, over to you, Ken, for the town.
I apologize, Norm, for coming in late and
No,
most of your presentation.
that's okay.
On the town side, everybody should gotten 2 pages. One is a revenue summary and the other is an expense summary. Remember that we are on a calendar year, so we're 2/3 of the way through the year. If I look first at the revenue summary, there's not much changed from when I presented this a month ago. As far as payment in lieu of taxes, the select board will be meeting with representatives from St. Methodius sooner as opposed to later. Motor vehicle permits are again running above budget, which is great. May end up contributing between $50,000 and $100,000 to a year-end surplus. In terms of accounts 3353 and 3356, the highway block grant and the state and federal funding, room and meals tax and state and federal highway block grant, we're anticipating at least 100,000 more than we had budgeted, which again is great. Under other income, we'll see that's significantly in excess of estimated revenue. That's primarily due to a welfare lien discharge was paid and we weren't anticipating it being paid. So that's really the highlights on the revenue side. If anybody has any questions, please.
What is driving the extra 100,000 over budget from the state or from the 3352 and 3353?
It should be 3352 and 53, and it's state budget. They were in the state budget. They included more than we had anticipated at the beginning of the year.
Got it.
Good question. Anything else on the revenue side?
What about the interest bank investments? Did you already talk?
That we have over estimated the rate of return we're earning on things.
Yeah. Okay.
So motor vehicle permits is registered car registrations, right?
Yes.
Wow.
And as I regularly say at town meeting,
Yeah.
thank you for buying your new car. On the expense side, again, nothing that's really different. Different from what I had explained last time. One good thing I'll point out, it's not reflected yet under account 4155 personnel. We expect a return of roughly $80,000 from our health insurance due to a surplus. We expect that in October. And Norm, I assume the schools will be getting something much larger than that.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what that is. Yeah.
Under 4195 cemeteries, they have their own reserve funds, so we'll be reimbursed so that account will come out probably about 100%. Under 4325 solid waste, as I mentioned a month ago, that's due to more testing is required from the state, primarily relating to PFAS. Welfare the welfare vendors is running high now, but they have a trust fund so that if they use 100% of their budget, then trust funds will be paying the balance. And long-term principal and interest, as I had reported last time, that was let's say a miscommunication in terms of working with the lenders, but we still expect that the refinancing is going to save us, the town, $300,000 for the life of the loans. One of the drivers of why I expect that we're going to be having unspent budgetary numbers is we have a number of open positions, just as most companies do. So for police and EMTs, we're going with part-timers. So we're filling the hours, but we don't have to pay the same retirement or health insurance. So it's savings, but even though while we continue looking for full-time people. We also have vacancies for building maintenance, for a part-time transfer station individual. Human resources will be transitioning from a full-time with Marilyn retiring to, I believe it's 30 hours a week position. And we had talked a little bit about Tyler Bridge. Last time it was going to be paid out of the road bond, and the estimates came in much higher than anticipated. Inflation and more work had to be done. So what is going to happen is that the side of the bridge that's in worse condition will be done this fall. And we'll put off till next year the other part. And that bridge is going to be closed for like 2 months later this fall. And also on a good note, with the American Rescue Plan funds, where we thought we were going to be really restricted on how we use them, there is a clause in there where if we calculate lost revenues, and they have a formula to do it. And initially, Neil and I thought, we don't have any lost revenues. We didn't use parking fees or anything like that. But the formula they have was so generous that we can, all of the money, the funds we're going to be getting can be considered lost revenues, which means we can use it however we want. There haven't been any hearings on how it will be used yet, but maybe it can be used to fix Tyler Bridge, things like that. We just have that much more flexibility, so that's a good thing.
You confused me. You said we could use it as lost revenue, but we didn't lose it.
No, they gave us a formula, and don't bet ballpark. It assumed that your budget was going to be going up 4% a year for the next 3 years, and the last year ours didn't, and because of that, we could still assume 4%, and the difference is lost revenues.
Okay, now I understand.
It was I'll say a crazy formula.
Yeah.
And Neil did it, and then I did it separately, and we both came in. It's in excess of what we actually were granted. So
We ought to talk about having you go up 8% next year. Maybe it'll happen again.
Federal accounting right
Just
there.
kidding.
Well, I mean, you think about it, what the voters approved in 2020 was influenced by the onset of the pandemic, certainly for the school and to some extent for the town. And so,
yeah, on the town side, we were looking originally at about a 7% increase in
right.
the tax rate, and it shifted it to 0.
Right.
And yeah, that wasn't exactly the rationale for the lost revenues, but that's a way to look at it.
Yeah.
A question, any progress on the pilot with Methodius?
We're gonna have a meeting, the select board's gonna have a closed session meeting with them. Our attorney has been involved. I think that's as far as I'm going.
When you look at your total expense, make sure I'm reading this right. When you look at the 2.73, that's what's not been spent to town. So at the end of the year, that'd be considered in the school district, like an unreserved fund balance. Is that kind of how would you
Let's
classify?
go into that, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Well, that would go into it, any revenues in excess of,
Okay.
what's on the other page would go into it, but remember, we still have.
Yeah, of course, yes. Yes, because like during your budget process, you can kind of see where you're at right now, like come like
Yes.
November. Yeah, perfect.
And there are things like late in the fall, we're gonna have a lot of snowstorms.
Yeah.
Storms, and they take a real.
Don't use the S word. No snow yet, no.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Ken. Jumping back, people that pay in lieu of taxes, besides Methodius, what other organizations? The fair?
The fair is the only other one of any real size.
Okay.
And we have an agreement with them that we're paying everything. Should be.
They had a good year.
And from their perspective, they had a great year.
Yes, it certainly looked like it.
Hope many of you were able to take advantage of county night. Stephen was, and I know Norm helped me hand out vouchers to townies. In fact, I gave it off to him.
I realized I know too many people, so but it worked out. I was really, thank you for the invite. It was great to see people out safely and really having a good time.
What is the recreation line item? Is that like town parks?
We have a recreation director who does, among many things, scheduling the different uses, different teams using different
Okay.
parks, the summer programs.
Okay.
A swimming hole and all the lifeguards and that kind of thing.
I saw that the town is hiring an economic development director.
Yes, it was budgeted originally in a part-time position, still going to be looking for part-time. We had retained a consulting firm, regional community economic development committee, and they weren't able to, let's say, put in the hours that we wanted. So we're actually underspending the budget, and we decided, let's look for a part-time person just dedicated to Hopkinton as opposed to spread all over the region.
What is the status of the Route 127-202 development area that we talked about in town meeting? Putting in a roundabout there and changing the status of the land. We swapped some land over by Mass Yard Forest.
I believe the swap went through. And then the other part is in the state 10-year highway plan, or whatever that's worth.
So we're waiting on the state to build that roundabout.
Or whatever, to decide what to do. I don't know if the roundabout is.
So the economic development this is over across from Dunkin' Donuts, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, so that opportunity is contingent upon the state doing some changes or upgrades to the road. I didn't quite remember that.
No, I mean, most of that, the land that we're looking to develop is private.
Right,
And so it's up to the private individual. If we had an economic development person, they might try to work with that owner, to spur something more.
does the town own some of that land there?
I believe the land we own is cross corner from Dunkin' Donuts.
Right,
Didn't we establish a TIF?
right.
Wasn't that a TIF whatever.
Yes, that area is.
It was like a strip of land along the 127.
Yeah.
Very, fairly narrow.
A little bit on.
Okay.
Maybe this is like too speculative to ask, but if this federal, dollars, if this budget gets passed for infrastructure, is it anticipated that any of those dollars would get down to be used on some of the road work and stuff like that? Like, is it likely that those dollars would funnel to the towns?
It's pure speculation, but I would certainly assume that the stimulus package passes,
Yeah,
we'll get
obviously,
something.
but
And the state
All
will
that.
get something too.
road work and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice, Krista, did you have another question?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Great. Okay, Don, where do you?
You all should have the July report for the precinct. The addition that's not on here, we had at our last meeting, the accountant said we had $130,000 in tax revenue from the town. So it shows zero there for January and July, 130 is in there. There's a lot of activity going on up the treatment plant for trying to upgrade the equipment and whatever. And we've already run, over what we were originally planning on doing there. This is on the second page down near the bottom, water treatment and repairs. In July, we spent 15, and through January through July, we're at 29, and we only had 20,000 budgeted. We're probably going to take some money from the capital reserve account and move it into that to help continue working on upgrading the plant to make it just more efficient and more smoothly running. On the last page, it shows down at the very bottom area, the 15,000 that I think was basically going to finished up the Linda Kimball field. We used that money from the previous year. The 15,000 under year-to-date budget is a minus 15,000. Can you locate that? That's about all I have there. They're just doing a lot of work at the plant to try to get that up to speed. There's a lot of things, moving parts up there, literally and figuratively, that they're trying to correct and make it more efficient. Any questions?
Yeah, what is your balance? I'm just trying, where you're taking the funds out in order to water treatment, repair and maintenance.
It would be, the balance sheet I'm not showing.
Oh, so there's no balance, what's in the account?
In the account is $1 million.
Okay. So it's not
There's
much.
plenty of money there.
Yeah,
Each
okay.
year we try to put in 250,000 just to build up that
Okay.
reserve, because we know in the coming year, whenever it happens,
Yeah.
we don't know when it is, but we're gonna have probably at least a $3 million
Yeah,
upgrade to the major treatment plant.
okay, so this is not out of the ordinary that you're over on this budget item.
Correct.
Okay, perfect,
And again, we've got more money coming in from the town.
perfect. Thank you, sir.
Don, you got 5,000 budgeted for legal fees, you haven't spent any?
We're trying to keep away from your, we're trying to keep away from your breed.
Got they got families to feed and all that.
John,
I'm sure you'll find a way.
Give me your card. I'm gonna pass it to him.
We're over by that.
Thank you, Don. Okay, Thomas.
We don't have any updates since last time. We haven't had a meeting yet, so no updates from that precinct.
Okay, very good. We have a public comment period. We don't have anybody in person. Actually, don't quite know how to do the public comments on the Zoom in this hybrid setting. Debbie, raise your hand if you want to make a public comment. And then we'll somehow figure out how to do that. And if not, thank you for tuning in.
Actually, Mark, if I could say something, knowing that we now have a vacancy.
But we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Don't mind. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to do that under the other business section, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah,
Thanks.
it was because you mentioned that.
You're recruiting? Good idea. Okay, we'll close the public comment period. And we are going to turn it over to Thomas. You'll recall that at our last meeting, we began to talk about what are some different metrics and benchmarks we could use to help the budget committee think about reasonable and acceptable impacts to the tax rate for our taxpayers in town. And Thomas has gotten the ball rolling and is going to walk us through some data that he's put together.
Yeah, there's paper copies there. And then I can also put it up on the screen too, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be good.
That'd be
'cause then
great.
you can see that.
Do you mind just switching seats? Just jump to this one.
One,
Here you go, Mr. President. Does everybody have a copy?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Well, my phone will-
Oh, yeah.
See that? Okay. So, I took a bunch of notes from what we talked about last time. There's a lot of stuff in there. And I tried to do kind of a first pass of just information I could find. There was a lot of ideas for things we could do in the future, but I figured get as much information that we know is out there, and then we can talk about things that might be more useful. I think there's a lot of stuff that comes out of this that can be really useful. I think there's a lot of places we can go from this, but for now, this is just stuff that I found. So if you have questions about it, just don't say it till the end, just shout them out. So the first section, I tried to kind of break it down into demographics information about the town, and then also the separate section about the economics of the town. But so for the demographics, I tried to look at as much stuff that I could find about population, both by age and economic breakdown. The income is a weird thing to look at, and I'm sure there's very accurate sources out there, but they're not necessarily public. So the public sources we have are the best I could find. So the first one is just the population over time, just as kind of a baseline to see how the towns are going. So since 2000, there's been a pretty steady increase, 5.25% over the last 20 years. Looking at the number of students in the school district, it hasn't really changed at all over the last 20 years. It'll fluctuate on any given year by 1% or maybe 2%, but in the year 2000, there was 990 students, and in the year 2019, I think there was 993 students. So in terms of the number of students that are in the town, it's relatively stable. So the growth is probably because of increased number of houses.
Another thing would be how many students go to school out of town
True.
and how many are homeschooled.
That's a very good point.
Do you know how we compare to the state?
In terms of population growth,
We're like a little slower, I think. Our population growth is less than the state as a whole.
yeah, still trending, like everything is trending up. And I think when I don't know have an exact number, but when I started to look at those things and there was the elderly population, the percentage difference was relatively small in terms of what we're doing, but yeah. That's a really good point, Ken. I'll try to find out. In terms of the age breakdown, this one I also expected the percentage over 65 to be a lot higher. I mean, it is very high, but the state average is also very similar to what we have. I expected us to be significantly over the state average, but it turns out that it's right about where it is. So this is the age breakdown. This comes from U.S. Census Bureau. A lot of these numbers all come from the same place, which is the American Community Surveys done by the census. Those only go into 2019, and then they stop. I think they release them the year after. And I think since last year, the census year, they're delayed this year. So a lot of the major numbers we have just go to 2019. So this is one of those ones that only goes to 2019. But this was the breakdown in 2019. And in terms of population over 65 being different than state average, that question actually is answered here, which is we are higher, but not by a lot. So this is the change in percentage of the town population that's over 65. I don't know what those big spikes are. I think they might just be weird things in errors in the census data, but I think the general trend tracks out, and that's basically the same trend that the state's seeing. I didn't do a ton of research into what the state average is, other than finding out what the state average is. But in that quick Google search, there was many different references to increasing elderly population being a general trend in New England as a whole. Not just us, not just the state, but in New England as a whole seems to be trending higher than the nation. And the nation is also seeing this same trend too, but it's not just us. So getting into income breakdowns, the income data is noisy. It's, in terms of the error breakdown, one of the big problems is that they break it down into really small bins on the low end and really large bins on the high end. So it's like $200,000 per household plus. That's like a relatively humongous bin of ranges. And then there's like a 10,000 to 15,000, 15 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 35. So in those small breakdowns, it doesn't take a lot of income change to make a big difference in where those people shift. So the income data is a little bit noisy, but the trends still kind of hold pretty well. So the current median income in Hopkinton in 2019 was $88,804. And over time, that's been growing. So every year that grows by about 4%, which is pretty good considering inflation. And we are higher than the state median income by a pretty sizable chunk.
Does the fact that the upward band is really broad mean that how did you get the median income number? Is that directly from the data, or are you assuming that like everyone over 200,000 makes 200,000?
They pull out the median income.
Okay.
So that's a known number.
Okay.
And income data, like the source of the income data, you can get that from payroll data, which is really accurate because there's payroll taxes paid to the state. They know every single person's income down to the penny. So like the actual median income in those numbers should be extremely accurate. But the way that they break it down into like categories that you can look at or data you can look at is broader. And so it gets a little bit more challenging when you try to look at like a stratification of the incomes. And there's a graph of that later on. It'll make a little bit more sense how that kind of breaks down. So one of the big things about income, and I think this goes back to a question, Donna, you keep bringing up, is that how does the income compare to the property values? How does that break down into disposable income, taxes, things like that? And I think this is one of the crux of the problem, which is I can't figure out a good way to match what your income is to what your property value is, to try to come up with a good idea of what your income tax is. So in terms of income breakdown, and this is kind of what I mean, is that like there's this big bin that's 200,000 plus and 150 to, or 100 to 150. There's these big bins, and then at the lower end, it really breaks it down into like 10,000, 20 to 30, 30, 40. It actually even breaks it down further than that. I had to kind of condense it to make it clear on this, but this is the kind of breakdown.
What's the median household size in Hopkinton? I know, is it 3 or 4? I'm wondering what the poverty rate is.
Yeah.
For.
So the poverty rate, I tried to kind of figure out. So I peg it at somewhere between 5 and 10%. The reason why that number is kind of hard is because all of the data sources break it down into like the poverty level of single family homes or like one person homes, the poverty level at. So you can find that out you can find the poverty level for like a household. And there is actually a chart that breaks it down in terms of how many people are in that household. But yeah.
So you didn't see anywhere that it said that
median household size in Hopkinton?
I am sure that exists.
Because if you have that, then you can figure out what the poverty rate is for that median and figure out what percent is below poverty or, should be 200% in poverty or 300%.
Yes, so they break it down in a lot of different ways. I'm sure we can figure that out. Yes. Yes, I see what you're saying. So you're specifically looking at the median household property rate. So like in terms of like an average, say, if we take our average household size and we find the poverty rate for that average household size, what's that rate?
Yeah, and if we then compare it to that, and if it says
Yeah.
it's 40,000, then, okay, we're 12% of our homes are below the poverty.
Yes, there is a breakdown. So this poverty level is based on, the census bases it off of the federal definition of the poverty rate. And that is broken down in terms of household income based on how many people are in that house. So one through 10. And I believe all of those poverty level numbers were below 35. I think it's like if you have 6 people in the household, then the poverty level is 35. Everything else is below that, way down to like 15K. So it's very, very low in terms of what they define as the poverty level. Unemployment is what we talked about.
I'm sorry, just to go back to that, and then that's gonna skew based on the cost of living
Yeah,
in
I
a
think,
particular state, right? Like, so that if it's 24,000 for a household of 4,
so I
in
didn't,
New York is different than in Missouri.
yes, I didn't look at state poverty data. I just looked at this, I just pulled it from the census data. I didn't dig deep into the poverty level. Like, I could definitely do that. I'm sure there are better sources for both, like what would be the average household and then also for state values. This is just from the federal data, which is, they peg the poverty level at extremely low, or the income, the poverty income is extremely low. You may be kind of hard to figure that out. So that we could definitely get a better number on. In terms of the unemployment data, this was kind of interesting. The town data only goes until 2020. And then there's extremely high resolution data for, they break it down every month for the state. So I could get to 2020 for the town, and then I think you can kind of extrapolate from there. So this is what it's looked like over the last 20 years. We've always been lower than the state average, but trending almost exactly the same. So I think it's safe to assume that we've probably seen a very similar shape to the state in the last 12 months.
The dash is town or the county?
The dash is the town, the solid line is the state. Oh, county, there is no town in Hopkinton data, they only go by,
County.
sorry.
Yeah, okay.
It's only done by county.
There was, maybe a year ago when they were reporting COVID, they were also reporting unemployment rate per town.
Per town.
Yeah.
Try to look for that.
It's remember looking at that, and we were consistently below the state average unemployment.
Great.
Tom, could you go back to the last chart again? The percentage down the left-hand side of that,
It's it should be 200,000.
you've got categories there that to me would be inside the other ones. Like you got the top one at over 200, the next one's 100 to 150.
Yeah, sorry, this should be 100, this one here should be 150 to 200. That should be 150 to 200, sorry. That's just my labeling.
And then 125 to 150.
About 150, 100 to 120.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So it's 250K to 100K on the 13.5?
No, 150 to 200.
Oh, okay, got it.
They go in order clockwise from smallest to largest, so
Got it.
Thank you.
sorry about that.
My brain jammed on this tonight.
Sorry.
Just knew you worked out.
Cool. Other questions on population stuff. And one of the big questions is what other stuff we want to see too. So we can make a list of other stuff that we think. So in terms of the economic data, I try to look at things like budget, amount of state aid, taxation, property values, these types of things. One thing that I tried to stay away from as much as possible is any differentiation between town budgets and school budgets. So everything, there is no breakdown or analysis of anything that's different between the state or the town and the school, only the town as a whole in terms of what we're spending. And I think except for the state aid, because that is a large chunk of money that just goes straight to the school. So in terms of what our budget is, what inflation is, this is a graph of that. So it's looking at if you started in 2000, what has been the percent change over the last 20 years in these things. So you have the budget, you have what inflation is, and then you have what our state aid has been. So our state education aid has stayed completely flat, pretty much. Which if you account for inflation, that means that we've got less state aid, effective state aid over time. Inflation's been extremely steady. And then the budget, the amount of money that the town is spending in terms of their budget has been increasing. Not the town, but the town and the school together.
There are items that the state has pushed the expenses down onto the towns and the schools.
Yep.
And so I don't want it to look like the town and school budgets are running, higher than inflation. A lot of it is driven by what the state has imposed on us.
Yeah, we'll put those negative numbers that goes right to us.
Yeah, no, I think there's, if you have other areas that we can look at of what those things are, that'd be really helpful, because that's a really glaring problem with the state budget. So or the school budgets, if you do break down the school versus the towns.
Well, like one that it impacted both of us is retirement. The state used to pay 35% in the town, or the school paid the remainder. And I think for the town, say this year, that's probably 150,000 that we have to pay, that had the state not eliminated their 35%, we would have.
So if you,
And the schools were a lot more than that.
Yeah, I also think in addition to retirement, another thing that's buried into those budgets is cost of healthcare, which
Right.
increases significantly higher than inflation. So that's a humongous portion of both budgets.
I wonder if there's a way to, I mean, that's a good visual, but a way to visualize if the state aid tracked the increase in inflation, then how would
What would that be?
what would inflation look like compared to the town budget? You know what I mean? Like just visually.
Yes, yeah.
I mean,
think
I
that
don't
would
know.
be, yeah, that'd be really interesting.
We could say, well, the state originally committed to revenue sharing with the town for room and meals. They changed the formula, and statewide it was tens of millions of dollars that the state kept that didn't go down to municipalities. So there were, I'm sure, much smaller items than that. So how beneficial is this? To have a comparison. You can't take everything into account that has been pushed down on the towns.
I think that kind of information would dilute a lot of the strong, very far left or right arguments as to why are these budgets going up so crazy?
Right.
So someone who really gets into it understands that, but for the normal person, they just don't have a chance to look at that kind of information. It would take away a lot of the argument.
Yep.
And bring it back to a real discussion of, well, this is why your taxes are going up, because the state, and then of course that drives a discussion. Does the state, and should they have an income tax or a sales tax to help offset that they've kicked back?
Yeah. Great.
Is there a way to identify for Thomas, like, what is that list of costs that have been downshifted? At least the ones that are big ticket items like retirement and healthcare, where you might be able to then tease that out and essentially normalize it in the absence of those, or Is there a way to identify those and then?
I mean, I could certainly ask Neil to try to develop a list and the dollars, but I need to understand why I'd be asking Neil to spend hours doing that kind of a calculation.
I could even just ask Neil, just like, is his guy, so between retirement, healthcare and schooling,
Why healthcare?
just because it's been, just in terms
It's
of.
not anything pushed down by the state.
So in terms of, what I'm trying to say is that between, I know it's not being pushed down by the state, but if you're trying to look at why is that line higher than inflation, between these three things, retirement, healthcare, and school aid, that would probably take up, my gut would be that would probably take up a sizable portion of that gap. And if it doesn't, then it's probably worth investigating into further. But if it, if it takes up that entire gap between inflation and the budget, then there's not really much point in asking Neil to spend any time on numbers. That makes sense. Like we might as well look at those three things first.
Okay, I add a fourth revenue share.
Revenue share.
But Thomas, it would be pretty easy to look at, so say you go back 5 years, or if you want to do 10, and just look at what is the cost for the town and for the school separately? What is the cost for health insurance? And just put that jack up every time, whatever the reason, more people, whatever, but that's the reason. Healthcare costs have gone from this level to this level to this level. And I think those two pieces would really explain a lot of the increase. And I can't imagine it would take very long to just look at those 10 years as to those two specific increases.
I might have.
And
I think I already have it. I can come back and look at it, but I think I already have it.
No, I appreciate, the question of how much can you ask Neil to do,
No, I agree.
but I don't think there's much there to have to do if you just have the basic budgets.
Right, no, and that's what I'm saying, I think that from going through the town report before, I think I have breakdowns of the health
Yeah.
insurance. So I don't, that's what I'm saying, I agree with you, I don't think we need to ask Neil for anything until we.
Okay, fine. I'm asking a lot of questions, but I want you to know that you did a great job.
Oh, no, yeah, no, questions are good, and finding problems in this is also helpful, because having more eyes.
I've got another problem later.
Great, excellent. So this is budget versus property values? No.
Spending.
Why did I put?
Give lifetime value.
So this actual graph is the budget versus town valuation versus inflation. So effectively, if you combine the budget and the town valuation, you end up with your tax rate. So, right. Blanking a little bit on this one. I'm still thinking about the health insurance.
The valuations are probably gonna really go crazy in the next 2 years.
Right.
That's the question, Ken. Can you, real quickly, I understand when the property value goes up, the tax rate normally goes down, okay? And as we all know with the way the market is right now, housing, what is the town's process for reevaluation on the assessed value? Because I noticed that people have come to me saying, my house has gone up and they just reassessed it a year ago. What is the schedule for the payment on that?
It's per state law, it's every 5 years. Everything has to be reevaluated. On an annual basis, the assessors will look at 20% or so of the dwellings in town for property tax purposes. That won't change your assessments from the last valuation, but it'll give them a basis for the next one. And then, let's say in 2021, they assess my house at such and such. Then, but it's not till 2025 that the townwide reval is done. So they would adjust the valuation they had done for me, put it up to 2025 numbers.
Is it a correct understanding that, each of those 4 incremental years till you get to the reevaluation year, there's a published number that says Hopkinton is being evaluated at 85% at the worst situation at 4.5 years out, they're at 91% of total real valuation at the third year out, et cetera, et cetera. So you can look at that
Yeah.
and anticipate what you're probably going to see your taxes go to when the reevaluation comes every 5 years. Is that a summary?
Yes, thank you, Ron. And it won't affect your valuation in the interim 5 years.
So these people are buying these houses that are assessed at $8,000 right now, and they just bought it, had 150,000 over what the assessment is. They're gonna get a shock probably in about 3-4 years.
Well, so this is one of the things that I find really interesting, and I remember why this specific graph was interesting to me, is that the tax rate doesn't exactly, does not really correlate at all to your tax rate. If you do a huge change or addition to your house and the valuation of your house changes, that will change your tax rate. But the tax rate going up or down does not necessarily correlate at all to your tax bill going up or down. And so the reason why this graph was really interesting to me is because the town valuation varies pretty wildly. There's like the 2005, 2010 years where it spikes and crashes. Then there's the last couple of years where it's spiking again. And what was interesting to me is looking at this, I kind of expected to see a similar thing happen to the budget. Because if you're looking at a target tax rate and you see a town valuation change, you have the ability to say, okay, we want to hit a zero change in our tax rate. And our town valuation last year increased by 25%. So you can increase the budget by 25% and have a flat tax rate. And so if we were using the tax rate as a guide for what our targets were, I would have expected to see a very similar kind of like wonkiness in the budget. But that doesn't actually happen, which is really interesting. The tax or the budget is much more stable than property values.
Do we actually know, and sorry, because this part is newer to me, is what is happening that the town is opting to change the rate to say, we don't need to take it, like we can actually lower the rate because we're gonna get the same nominal value because property values has not, is that what actually happens?
The town sets the budget for how much money needs to come in.
Yeah,
And then the state gets that number and has a number of what the property values of all the houses are. And then those combine into the state saying this is what the tax rate is for this section.
But essentially, if your budget stayed flat year over year and your tax valuation went up, your tax rate's gonna go down.
okay,
Rate.
Your rate is
The
gonna
rate
go down.
doesn't-
Your taxes,
Yeah.
your actual money is gonna be probably the same, but
right, but.
I mean, on
To
average,
his
not.
point, you could say, like, we could look forward and say, all we want to be able to tell the residents of, I'm not saying we'll do this, but in theory, you could say, we're going to tell them that we're going to keep the rate the same. But that would, if home values went up, imply that you have some additional budget to spend.
Yes.
Okay.
And you'd have a potentially big jump every few years with
And your
evaluation.
actual
Your
residents
actual,
will be getting much higher
Right.
bills than they.
When the townwide evaluation is done and all the assessments go up, the rate goes down correspondingly.
Yeah.
So that theoretically, on average, everybody should be paying the same,
Correct.
on average. Well, at town meeting, the dollars of the budget is approved that we have to live within. One of the things that Norm and I had a disagreement about respectively last year
Yes.
was the townwide assessment, how much it would be going up, where I believe, Norm, you kept it at 0 and we went up 0.5%. We had quite a bit of discussions about that, but that was really the only play we had in terms of.
When does that get settled? That's good.
It gets settled by the state.
yeah,
So that's-
very soon.
So the budget goes,
Yeah.
one budget gets into the state has the property values, makes up the tax rate. And so that's why, like, at the voting, the tax rate is helpful, because if you have a bond that comes up that says we're gonna spend $1 million on the school, the tax rate right then is really useful because each individual person knows this is the value of my home, this is the change in the tax rate, it's gonna cost me personally $5,000. I'm voting yes or no based on this $5,000, but that tax rate number is gonna be based on whatever the state comes up with at the end of the year. So if you come up with a zero, and you say flat, and the state goes up, then what that person is voting on is not the same.
The tax rate is set by the state, I believe, in October.
Yeah.
And our tax bill that we get mid-year in July is based on just one half of what the previous one that was set the previous year in October. And then it's all corrected in that second tax bill that you get after the tax rate is set in the current year of October.
But this also goes back to all the discussions we've had, like, do we want to raise the budget by 3%, by 2%? I mean, this is getting at that.
Yeah,
I spend so much time talking about.
Right, and I think there's like looking at a lot of these things, there's a lot of different things you can look at for what could be helpful, and I think you could blend a lot of these things together too, like. But I think like the town valuation is definitely not a good one because it jumps and goes crazy. It's all over the map. Like, we can come back to whatever. So this is actually another really interesting one, which is the changes over the last 20 years in state education aid versus how much we pay in state aid taxes. And other than like the last year where there's a giant spike apparently one time, they trend very, very similar. So the expectation is if we're getting less in state education aid, we should also be expecting to pay less in state education taxes. Pretty corresponding.
And Norm, this state education aid rate, it's quite low now, isn't it?
I don't know off the top of my head, but, for each student? It's
No,
3,500.
The tax rate,
Tax rate,
He probably has.
like $2 thereabouts.
I have it in terms of dollar amounts. But it's really low. It's like $2 million, $3 million.
We have 30 seconds to evacuate the building before we all.
Keep looking for Tom Cruise.
State tax effort. Yeah, I think you're right, $2. Going down to, I think it's 1.8 and.
Please, someone please correct me about this, but and I'm not 100% sure about how the voucher program works, but isn't the voucher program, wouldn't that be a reduction in state aid if parents elect to take that voucher from the state, which something like if it's $3,500, I'm not sure what it is. Something that's something in the equation down the road that we need to look at, as additional revenue coming through missing. Just something I'm just remembering, just seeing in the news that was approved. So something to think about. We have students that are no longer in our public schools. To raise an appropriate budget, it's going to be less aid from the state.
That's true.
The next one gets closer to the question that I asked last time, which is based on how much money you have, how much money are you spending on taxes? And the best way that I found to do this so far is effective median income tax. The reason why I like this is because there is national data from other states. So other states do have sales tax and income tax and property tax and all the other things. And so in other states, they blend it together. There's studies done to blend it together into an effective income tax. So based on how much income you get, how much money are you paying in state taxes in various forms. In New Hampshire, it's really easy because it's just the property tax. So this is a graph.
Not sure. Interest and dividends tax is a tax that probably a lot of the families pay in town.
True, that is important. That is correct.
I'll bring it up now. You totally ignored commercial and industrial. How does that fit into it?
Industrial tax in terms of.
Well, if you're trying to compare to other parts of the state, where over 90% of our assessed value is residential, which is probably significantly above the rest of the state. So how do you take that into account?
So that's, no, it's right. So that's looking at in terms of differences between two towns or counties. That makes sense. But what this is saying is, this is for households in terms of the amount of money that that household is getting, how much is that household spending? And the value that's comparing to the state is also for households. And then the comparison to other states as well is just for households.
Mhm.
So if all of those other sources of taxes would go to help reduce someone's tax load, then that's totally true. And that's why if you can't really, you couldn't use this to compare us. Well, you still could use it to compare us to like Bo, because yes, they do have like a power plant and they have all the other income, so their taxes are lower. And that would show up as a lower effective tax for people that live in.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure I understand what this chart says.
I feel like this is easier almost if you flip to your last, like, this is basically what you did, right, on this last slide, is you took.
Yeah, so I should have written that. I thought I did write that on the one above it. So where this comes from, the effective income tax, the median income tax, this is, you take the median household and you take what the median income is, and you use those two to compare. So you take the median property value, use the tax rate, come up with that tax bill. And then you take that median income, you compare the percentage of that income is going into that tax bill. That is not, there's problems with that because you're making the assumption that the median income is matched with the median property value. There is a problem there, but it's the best I think I can come up with so far. And I think there's arguments for and against it. I think it's worth looking at different things, but it's just it's a starting point for sure. In terms of this graph, we are kind of generally around the state average. We're not crazy higher, we're not crazy low.
Just to be clear, when this is compared against other, so this is, sorry, this is a household's income spent on property tax and compared to the state average, but this is not looking across states to say other state taxes.
So you mean looking at like California, for example?
Yeah, like,
So the studies do that. I don't have the data here. We generally fall in like the lower section. I think in last year we were like 18th lowest.
right, because
So-
like New York is like a ridiculously high.
Right, and like Alaska and Montana are crazy low. So there are outliers. We're not, the state as a whole is not crazy high or crazy low. Kind of somewhere in the lower half. But I could definitely find the exact number because that is out there.
How much work would it be to add a line here? You got the state average for 2021. Can you actually chart that line across this
Yes.
period?
I can't.
I just think it's, the people, it's like the school will often make the case. I think I've heard this many times. We deliver a well above average education for an average per pupil cost, right? And I do think it's helpful to benchmark as imperfect as this is, because you said there's a bunch of assumptions in here, but just to benchmark against the state over time.
Yeah, so the reason why it's not up here is the comparisons between states, for looking at states, those are not done by any like state or government organization.
I'm just thinking within.
So yeah, so it'll take a little bit longer, but it's definitely out there. I can definitely find it, but
But it's really powerful that it isn't just a slope up. Right? Like, I mean, that's the argument that we hear again and again, but in fact, this is kind of staying between whatever, it's relatively consistent over time. Like, so that's pretty counterintuitive to what you hear at a lot of budget meetings.
yeah, so that so if you compare that to here though, you kind of see their picture. And one of the reasons is, so if you go back to like one of the very first graphs of household income increases about 4% every year. So that's why if you look here, there's the median tax bill, which has been increasing. But in terms of the percentage of some person's income, they're kind of about matched. So this one is similar, where you have the changes in the median income tax over the last 20 years. You also have the tax rate in red, and you also have the median tax bill. So the median tax bill is you take the median property value, match it to the median income, and come up with, you take the median property value and just take the tax rate, and you come up with what that property value's tax bill for that year is going to be. So that has been increasing. Income fluctuates, but right now we're about where we started. And then the tax rate also fluctuates. But what's interesting to me is the area in the mid 2000s where the tax rate goes down, but the tax bill goes up.
Well, that's because home values went up during that time,
Right.
which is also presumably what's happening now.
Home values went up and the budget went up.
Right. So like I think in the last year, the property values, like if you look at the last like 2 quarters, property value increases have been 25-30%. So like theoretically, we should be seeing a humongous reduction in the tax rate for the next whatever the valuation is.
What's challenging, I mean, this is really interesting data, and what's I think challenging about it is that the effect of, the effect of tax rate, it's correlated here to property value, but that doesn't really correlate well to income, especially for older people, right?
Yes.
Especially for elders and retirees. That's one place where it really breaks down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this kind of gets a little bit closer, like another view of that question, which is how the home values compared to the incomes. And so this is the distribution on the top of all the property values in town. And it's a little hard to read, but it's, the peak is right at the median. And then there's the incomes below it. So the incomes seem to be a little bit flatter distributed across the population, but the home values have a much more standard curve. So I don't really have any good notes on this other than.
I mean, an average income may match, to your question, it may match an average property value between a certain age range. And then it probably doesn't outside of that age range as well. The correlation probably gets weaker.
Well, if it were dramatically, if you had folks that were on a fixed income and dramatically economically hampered by their ability to stay in their homes, isn't that what the town system is for? Like, because you don't want to just arbitrarily say that any senior in their home has issues paying their tax bill. Some people are probably within this income bracket somewhere based on distributions from their retirement account, whereas others are probably solely relying on Social Security, and those may be the target for tax relief, right?
Yeah, for seniors and disabled individuals that are low income, there are different tax breaks. But for people that are younger than seniors that are able-bodied, there's no tax break if they're low income.
For seniors though, is there a tax break regardless of your income? Is it purely, or it's age-based plus income? Requirements?
It's age-based plus income plus
Right.
assets.
Okay, yeah,
What was the last?
assets.
And I think the last town meeting, we actually increased the levels for, I think, both income and assets. For seniors and disabled.
I think to that question, it's worth trying to figure out if we can break down not incomes across the population, but incomes across ages. I don't know where that would come from, but it's and also because
Or home value across ages.
and yeah, both. That one might be much harder to find.
I also think it's interesting to consider what is the role of the town if you're below 65 and not tech or 62, or you're able-bodied and not technically on fixed income for any reason. Is there, what, besides temporary economic hardship, what is the role of the town in ensuring you can pay your tax bill? That sounds harsh, but,
We do have a, welfare department.
right,
And if somebody that fell into that category had lost their job and, but prior to that had been a good taxpayer and whatever, they could come and potentially get some assistance.
like some kind of temporary assistance. Okay.
Or maybe a tax lien against their property or something. So there is a little, but I certainly would want to expand that.
Mhm.
That's all I got. I got a lot of questions about next steps, but that's all I got. That's my question.
That's a good summary to start, just discussion of
Yeah.
what you can do, what you can't do.
There's some like big next things that I would love to try to do. The first one would be a 5 to 10 year tax projection. So just like a relatively large model that factors in a lot of these different things to come up with what would a tax bill and a tax rate be for the next 5 to 10 years. To do that though, we would need to make some assumptions about stuff.
I would love to see the property values of the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'd almost say
That'd be challenging.
for property values, you just leave them flat because you're trying to look at what the effective impact on the tax rate is.
That's a really good point. Because it doesn't matter.
Where the discussion Norm and I had about, whether you should increase the assessment by townwide by 1% or whatever.
Right, that doesn't actually matter in terms of looking at what a tax bill would be. However, you would need to change that then to number of households, because if the population is increasing.
Yeah,
that does
if
reduce
we've
the tax bill.
added 10 homes and
Yeah.
400,000 each or whatever.
Probably doesn't, but does ownership versus rental factor into this or not?
There are rentals, there are certainly a
I'm sure,
distinct minority.
I'm sure it's
And-
few and
and
far between.
The landlord pays the property taxes
Right.
anyway.
Right.
They're more likely probably to be a lower income individual.
Does that come in as commercial property tax?
I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry. Does that fall in the bucket of like commercial property tax? Or would that show up as household
If
residential?
it's a landlord renting
Yeah.
to residents, I believe that would fall under residential. As I said, there were very few actually.
So that's one thing I want to work on. Another thing I think would be super useful is to come up with a bond calculator that would allow you to put things into it. Say like how long until a project would be required, how long that project would take, how much the bond would be, what you're expecting. Inflation rates are just for the money, but then also for like if the construction prices are going to change over time. And then that would spit out a number of saying, if you saved this money, X number of dollars over the next X number of years, this is how much money you'd spend. And if instead you waited and took out a bond, this is how much money you would spend. That I think would be something that would be helpful as well. And then there's a lot of questions about what other information would be useful. And then also if we're going to come up with some other version of what the tax load is versus for a normal person, or what target we should be looking at, what other factors would we want to base it on?
Yeah, I'd love to see you do the dissertation that you've talked about a couple of times. Let's take the category of the roads. Do that 20-year look to see
Yeah.
if you jacked up our tax bill and put in extra money for the roads and did that every year compared to waiting 5 years and then do a monster bond, pay the taxes. It'd be nice to see that because that's an argument for, moving one way or the other.
Yeah.
By us as a recommending body to say, this is our recommendation. We don't want to bite the bullet, but here's what the logic is of doing something like that.
Good point.
The
Yeah.
school was quiet for a while, right?
School is quiet.
For 10 years, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go 3.
We're working on a new CIP, which, you got to invest into that.
Yeah.
So that's what,
Yeah, because when you have a CIP, you can plug it into that kind of a model.
Yeah.
and we
And
plan on
see.
working with the town. We have asked the board members to work with the town on that, which I think you're part of, correct? Mr. Houston?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's coming up soon, right?
Neil just sent out the notice to both sides to say, let's get the CIP numbers
Yep.
going quickly, because that should be the front end of the budget, not the end.
Yep,
And
and
they
that's,
always end up being at the end and they say, no, we're not gonna do that.
yep, that's been delegated and,
But what sort of what I asked Tom, that's a long range look at, what really a CIP for both sides, bond versus cash.
and with the facilities project, we will have numbers from HL Turner on everything that they've done for us to know what we need to put into our CIP. So we're basically starting with a new life.
Because you can't sell the cash idea, because it's so easy to kick the can down the road for 5 years, and then you got the monument, which we did with the school. But you can't sell that until you have it laid out and say, here's dollars and cents of how that works.
So I can start on that last part, the bond calculator, and look at like different scenarios with the roads. I can get started on that pretty easily. Are there other things we might want to look at in terms of things that would affect a target tax level?
The one thing I always struggle with, Tom, is people are always saying their taxes are going up so much, but when you take the average mean of like 3 or 4 years, it ends up being like the cost. How can we show that what they're seeing is not a significant increase, that when you put the mean together at 5 years, it only ends up being very minimal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the first step in that would be to verify that across different home value stuff, because I think that is definitely true of the median.
Yeah,
But it might be very different across, it might be very different if you look at large home values on fixed incomes or lower income.
because so I've seen people whose taxes go down $1,000, right? And then they're happy, but they don't budget that $1,000 and they get that increase because it goes like that.
The tremendous tough nut that we face, and what Krista talked about just briefly, where you've got those folks who had a good income and they had a really nice property and they lost that income. Now they're living on retirement, whatever that is.
I agree.
If they don't have assets beyond Social Security or whatever,
Yep.
they're the ones that really feel the bite. And obviously, all the people that are, to me, the threshold is thought of at $100,000. So if you're a 2-person, when you got 2 kids, you've got to have a minimum of $100,000 just to sort of survive. And from there down is what really we hear the screaming about. People are earning $150,000, or older people who have assets. They pay their taxes and don't even think about it. It's all that discretionary income for the lower end people.
I think those numbers are out there because there are pretty detailed numbers on social security income levels. So I think we take it. I think we'd be able to get a pretty good bite into what those numbers look like.
But the missing piece is what in addition does someone have for assets?
No, right. What I'm saying is if you can come up with one of the things I'm going to try to find is income breakdowns by age. And so this is the average median income for people over 65. And then you also know because some of the social security number breakdowns say their only income in social security. So then you'd be able to look at how many people in town are only on the fixed income of social security versus people who also are drawing retirement from other.
That number's available
I-
that shows,
I think it is.
Wow.
Based on what I was doing yesterday, I think we could find it in there. So
that would be really important information.
it's worth looking.
And Tom, I agree with your comment that there are people in town who are on a fixed, income with social security and other things, but there are people who are employed that struggle to make, who have outstanding debts to student loans and other things in their lives that don't have the income that they would have. So it's really good, it pays for daycare to work or to have health insurance and stuff. There's a perspective that I think it's important that we look at that also. I understand what you're saying, but there is people who make a good salary or even less salary that have some things that they don't.
I agree, and I feel like I keep bringing this up. It's still not totally clear to me what the town options are, and for either bracket of younger employed folks, I'm generalizing here, but younger able-bodied employed folks who might be struggling versus programs for seniors who might be struggling to make their tax bills. Is there somewhere I can read or understand more? Because I think that's actually really important, like where there might be tax relief, because if we're making a decision based on averages that might be slightly elevated relative to the rest of the state, or we think that there does exist a wealthier, property-rich portion of the community that could take a little bit of a harder tax hit, we need to make sure that whatever percentage of the population can't take that in has protection.
I guess in terms of the different eligibility levels for low-income seniors or whatever, I think would be in the last town annual report, would have been the warrant article that would have laid out what the thresholds were.
Okay.
In terms of the number of individuals or couples that are receiving those benefits, assume Neil could put his hand on that fairly readily.
Yeah.
I'm a little struggling because I'm not sure if that's.
Well, I think I think it'd be helpful for the committee. I think this is something we can't ask Neil to do, right? Which is, what are our current tax relief programs?
Yeah.
Age, income, and otherwise based. What are they? How many people are taking advantage of them? What's essentially the cost to the remainder of the taxpayers?
Yeah.
Neil has that information. I think.
And with
And then I
this
think, like-
information, we might be able to identify how many people are eligible potentially, but not taking advantage of them.
We got a breakdown of this last year.
Yeah. So I think Neil can update it and maybe talk about, and is there potential to do more or not? If we, I mean, it's not our decision, we could recommend something.
From what I remember, so this is like a ringing couple bells. From what I remember when we talked about this last year, the state sets very specific requirements about about what you're allowed to do, and then the town sets the rate changes based on that. So
Yeah.
the state says you can only do it for people over 65. You can only break it down into 3 clumps after that, but then we get to set the rates.
And I think there were some dollar thresholds.
The dollar thresholds, right, the income levels.
Yeah, and I think we can get the number of individuals or couples that are receiving benefits, but I don't know if we would anywhere know how many others theoretically could receive benefits, but are not reaching out to us.
Because we don't have income yet.
Can you, Tom, can you somehow plot in here, I think on the, maybe, I don't know if it's on the income breakdown, but also changes in social security
Yes.
rates? I mean, just be interesting to see how that compares to overall income rates, because it won't track the same.
We can't do that.
And then on the spending versus property value charts, can you just denote somewhere the years that the reevaluation has occurred? This might help to explain the data.
Sorry, for one.
On the spending versus property values charts, if we could just like asterisk or put in a note of what years the reevaluations happened.
Got
It might help to explain some of the data.
Got it.
Good point.
Suzanne, Kel, I have a question. Is this considered something that is a public document that will be shared, or is the budget committee has to approve that?
So we share, I asked Deb to post this.
Okay, so this is
Yeah, I don't.
really great.
I assume it's online now. I haven't checked, but I did forward this because if we talked about this, I remember a year or two ago, and we agreed that if it was something that we were gonna be discussing as a committee,
Yep.
we wanted to make it available to the public.
Perfect.
It should have some caveat though, on that this is a draft information. It's not fact. It's fact as best we know it, but it's not edict. It's not proven. It's just discussion
Yeah, for
material.
discussion material.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we can try to, let's try to do that maybe for the next version, just draft for discussion or something like that. Good point, Don. Yeah, we're trying to distinguish, it's not something that's necessarily been endorsed by the committee as a whole, but it's information that we're looking at.
I think this kind of information discussion helps us understand how difficult this is, and hopefully it'll have others who just come in here at the last moment and say, well, what the hell's going on? It'll enlighten them as how difficult this is and how much quicksand we're dealing with. And we really can't get at the facts of knowing who's really hurting and who's not hurting.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good.
thanks so much.
I do think like a strong visualization of, that tension between the increase in costs and the.
It'll enlighten them as how difficult this is. Who's really hurting and who's not hurting.
What did I do?
Don't end it. No.
Transmitting us on a delay.
Okay, guys.
Pay no attention.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
It's all gone haywire.
Weird noises.
Just the visualization of increase in cost and a decrease in state dollars. I mean, and I'm thinking to head to town meeting. We talk about that and we sort of, but I just think it's important for people to really find some way to show that in a way.
So I've only been around for X number of years, and all my numbers only go back to the year 2000. So how much further back do you think that type of thing has happened in terms of the state offloading?
Probably forever.
I don't know.
It's 10 years. So many people moved in 10 years. I think 10 years is fine. I mean, you can go back and, go back 20 years and it's not going to help you.
Well, one of the things that's kind of curious to me is that the tax rate seems to not really increase the way it doesn't seem to really change. It's really weird too. Because none of these percentages are the same. It's like the budget's increasing one number, income's increasing number, property values are increasing a totally different number. So something should be happening. It should be going one direction, but it seems to be staying.
It seems to get up to about 30 and then from that back.
Right.
Well, it's
Back up to 30.
It's the reevaluations that keep doing that. I mean, back, 10 years ago, when I kept putting this information out, the tax rate was just going like this.
No, right.
And then all of a sudden, bingo, it goes down and we went from the top tax rate in the state to the third, and then all of a sudden we get a reevaluation, we go down to 12.
Right.
And now the argument of saying we have this horrible tax rate goes away for the moment.
Right. I'm also kind of curious if maybe there's a change in the way that the town meeting conversations go on a 4-year cycle. Again, I've only been to so many town meetings, but is there a general tone that the year after a town valuation, there's not really much conversation, and then on the 3rd year before a town valuation, there's a lot more conversation?
I wouldn't say so.
The difficulty we had the year before last fall, certainly fall in the evaluation. As far as getting budgets passed, conversation. Else. But obviously with COVID.
All right, cool. I got a ton of stuff that I can keep on my out.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah,
Awesome.
that was awesome.
Super helpful.
Thank you so much.
When I was pulling up my notes from my presentation for the town meeting this past year, and just for information purposes, when, because of the increase in the exemptions for the elderly and the disabled, that resulted in about a 0.5% increase in the tax rate. And we were estimating around 75 elderly taking advantage, and I think 2 disabled.
Do you have the dollar amount that relates to?
We were, again, estimating about $4 million would be the increase in the exemptions.
Increase, but yeah,
And that related to how much tax revenue?
That's the exemptions. The
Right.
exemptions would compare to $800 million townwide valuation. Is that what you're asking?
No, I actually, maybe you answered the question. Now, how much did the taxpayers have to pay to cover that?
Roughly $25,000,
Okay,
about 0.5%.
Yeah, that's the number. It's not much.
Yeah, and that's just on the 0.5% would be compared to the town portion of the tax rate. Not the whole.
That was the change factor, that was the delta, but the total amount for exemptions is what?
The total amount for exemptions is the 4 million, but in terms of the impact on the tax rate is 25,000.
You mean the tax bills or
The
amount?
tax bills.
Yeah,
Somehow I remember that when the one sheet that the town presents, it was like $300,000 or $400,000 was in that category. 180, maybe it was 200,000 of what it cost to cover all of those expenses.
Okay, maybe all, but because we had a rate before, this was the increase in that.
Right, that's the delta. But
Yes.
I don't have the number here, but it was a pretty substantial number.
It was $4 million or equating to 25,000 shift in
you're talking
who
about
pays taxes.
what the total cost is to the town.
Correct.
Yeah,
yeah.
so Neil can share that with us. I mean, that could be part of what Neil shares with us. Is what's the total cost?
It's shown on that one page at the
Yeah.
bottom. Very good.
Okay, great. So we are on any other business to come for the board, and I have a few things that I wanted to bring up. So first, just to circle back to something that Ken was starting to get to, our esteemed colleague Janet Krasniak has communicated to me that she is going to need to step down from her role on the budget committee. I'm sorry about that. Janet's been a really long time member of this committee, and obviously everybody knows Janet. She's been an incredible public a volunteer in so many different ways for this community. I learned a lot from Janet in my first 5.5 years on this committee, including how to chair it. So I've communicated back with her my gratitude. And it creates a vacancy. So Neil was kind enough to create a help wanted ad. Hopefully we'll have more success than the town has had in filling its open positions. The pay is really not that good, but the benefits are fantastic. So I'm gonna try to get this, I will get this from Neil by email, or ask Neil and Deb to distribute this to all of you by email. I would encourage you to reach out to people that you know. If there's anybody from the public who's following this right now who might be interested, this appointment will carry through through next town meeting. So it will be essentially a one budget cycle appointment. We're going to accept applications through the end or through October 1st. And the town has a very simple application form that you can get online. So it'd be great if we could recruit somebody to fill this position.
And Mark, I don't know if I can short circuit the discussion or not. I I talked to Neil and asked if the budget committee could just appoint somebody. And he said yes. And Deb Norris is interested. She served on this committee before. She was an elected person on this committee before. She didn't run for reelection because she was a part-time town employee. She's not anymore. So I don't know if the committee would just be interested in appointing her.
I would like to follow up with that real quick. I know from the school board's point of view, when we had a vacancy, and that was a couple times, the first thing we did, and this is just from my perspective, is we actually went down previous elected officials to kind of get a feel if they want to come back to serve that window. And it was unanimous at the time on that board, that was the steps that we would take. I guess it kind of leaned towards, instead of having an application process, it didn't give them a leg up in political perspective if they decided to run or something like that. But we looked at it in a way of a previous elected official that had experience and that was on for that one term. That's just the experience of the school board when we had someone step down and someone came on. So I can see his perspective on that.
The other option might be is just another option is to whoever tried to get elected to this, go back and ask them if they would like to come on.
I don't remember who else was there more people running than,
I think it was a fellow who I don't know whether he actually did it or not, but he owns some good donuts.
I ran unopposed.
Yeah, as did I.
But the fellow that, owns it
I
Dunkin'
was kind of a
Donuts.
spokesperson campaign, but I ran.
but nobody ran.
Right,
That's my point.
but he was, and I know he was discussing it at the time, but that doesn't mean anything.
So I have a question. If we do not appoint somebody, then we have a vacant seat next April.
March.
Right.
So we have a choice of either
So we will,
keeping the seat
Yeah.
open or appointing it.
right, and the question is, so it's up to us to appoint somebody, and if we can proactively recruit somebody, or it sounds like we already have somebody who's interested. That was news to me right now. So it's up to, we can vote and appoint someone tonight. We can have an open period where we invite other people to express their interest and then vote and appoint someone at our next budget committee meeting. It just means the benefit of doing it tonight is that we would have somebody in place for October. If we wait until October, we will not have somebody in place until November. So there's some trade-offs. But either way, it's up to us. We have the authority to appoint somebody, and we would do it through a vote of this committee. If we had more than one candidate, we would weigh those candidates.
The advantage of Deb is she knows the system. She's been here. If we did not do that, would we interview the other candidates, and who would choose who it was?
We would choose as a committee
Would we interview
based
them?
on, I mean, I would just look at the
Yeah.
applications that they submit, but that's my perspective.
This experience, Benton, I mean, there's quite a bit that goes into it when.
Yeah. Okay, Jonathan.
I would just say anecdotally, I felt like we had a hard time getting
To apply.
two candidates for this last election. I think my understanding is, I don't know, Krista, but that was a 11th hour
Yeah.
after a lot of
Thank
strong
you,
lobbying
Krista.
from some people that I know. And
I certainly got the impression that people were not jumping to sign their names up.
and
Hard to believe.
certainly appreciative of.
I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Deb Norris as our temporary committee member.
Yeah, I would second that.
I would
I would
second
second that.
And for discussion, I think it's a great path for the budget committee with her experience and what she brings to this community.
Is there further discussion about Deb? My only reticence is that I haven't actually heard Deb say that. And so as this is the chair, like I haven't had any direct communication. So it's not that I don't trust you, Ken. I do.
I spoke to her this
Okay.
morning and she was enthusiastic and
Okay.
traded some emails since
Okay.
then. She actually had the presentations that
Okay.
you presented. And
Thank you.
And she stayed on the line, said something.
It might be more effective if you don't tell
She's listening in right now. That's good. Hi, Deb. Is there further discussion? And Cindy, for your benefit, this is Deb Norris, Norris, Debbie Norris.
Is it a temporary position?
This is a position that will run through the March, through town meeting, so through this budget cycle. And that actually is the end of the term anyway. For Janet and I are both, this is the final year of our terms. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of appointing Deb Norris to fill the seat vacated by Janet Krasniak, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
I have a quick question. Do we have to remove Janet first with a motion, then add Debbie on? Because I know. Do we have to do that first?
If she formally resigned,
Does she formally resign?
Formally resigned. I don't know if we have.
Do we have to do a motion? Then
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so we'll just leave it up there.
Yeah. If we need to, I'll ask Neil, but he didn't tell me.
Okay, all right.
So any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, Deb, thank you. If you can hear us,
She's on.
we're excited to have you. There's a warm seat for you here. Great, thank you. And keep Janet in your thoughts, and so we all hope that she's on a good trajectory. Okay, another issue I had was just because a question came up earlier about in-person versus remote at these meetings. You can participate remotely, but we have to have a quorum in person in order to hold this meeting. So we're not under the executive order or the emergency order anymore for COVID, at least at this point. So if you would like to participate remotely, I would just ask if you could tell me in advance so that I can make sure that we have a quorum, or I can know in advance if we're not gonna have a quorum, and then strong arm a couple people to show up. Is that okay?
And just for quorum for this committee is 6.
Quorum is 6, yes. We have 10 on the committee.
You want to take a straw poll just to see who's comfortable coming here each time? So you'll up front have some kind of a feel?
I can have ask Deb to do that. I just means I'm asking her to do.
No, a poll to.
Oh, you mean right now?
Yeah, who wants to do it this way rather than who might want to stay at home and, do it.
We can do that, but it just, I think, Don, I mean, and just in my experience, it's just shifting so quickly. I think people's comfort level when I see this changes on an almost daily and certainly weekly basis. I wasn't in the mask last time we were here, and now I am. So we can poll tonight, but we're not meeting for a month. And so we really need to know this just before the next meeting if people want to be remote.
Probably will get worse rather than it gets
Well,
better.
I support Marcus' thoughts process. Let's take it one day at a time. And I'm glad we're able to be in person right now.
You too.
I would just ask that maybe we could spread ourselves out for next time.
We can be
Yeah.
on film though, that's the problem.
if we're not getting members of the public, I'm sure we can spread out.
Yeah, I think we can do a little bit more. Yeah.
But that does connect though to the issue of just like, because if people do appear by video, then we're spread out. And so I don't think that option should be discounted, the idea of appearing remotely.
I think it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, in terms of like that tension between spreading out, being able to be seen by the public.
Yeah, but right now, legally, we have to have a quorum physically.
Right, no, I get
And
that too.
that's could be an issue as time progresses.
Yeah, so I don't want anyone to feel like they're going to be judged if they would like to participate remotely. That's completely fine with me. I just want to know in advance so we know if we might not have a quorum. That's all. And we'll accommodate and we'll make sure it can work. I think hybrid meetings are going to be a reality in many places forever. or for the foreseeable future. So we need to get good at them. Okay, the next, these are all little things. Well, they're not all little things, actually. They're important. This is coming back to a question that you brought up or you raised, Ken. So last year we had quite a vigorous conversation about whether we should go with the town's approach of budgeting for a 1% increase in the valuation, which affected what the proposed tax rate would be versus the school board has had a more, and this was new for the town to do that. The school board took a more conservative approach, which was to budget for a flat valuation when you calculated your tax rate. We ended up, after a pretty vigorous conversation, you'll remember, and a rather split vote, recommending that the boards use 0.5%, and that was based on the information that Neil provided about the number of new construction and renovations that were going on, and some rough estimates of how past those numbers in the past have correlated with property valuation increases. And the town ended up using 0.5%.
Yes.
In the end, the school decided not to follow that recommendation and stick with a flat rate. And, you know, I think we talked last year, it came in pretty late in the game last year. So we talked about revisiting that earlier in the budget process. And so I want to bring it up now, at least for not so much that we have to decide today, but to start the conversation. And I thought we would ask Neil if he could give us similar data for our next meeting on how many new home constructions are underway, as far as we know from the permitting, how many renovations are underway. That could inform them.
That'll hit the valuation next time.
What's that?
The new renovations or building that'll hit the
It'll hit the
valuation.
Yeah, for next year. So that was one thing that I would like to do and ask Neil. But I guess I wanted to see if people wanted to start that, or if you have any initial thoughts, or if we want to wait for that data and then talk about it at our next meeting.
Where did the number actually come out?
I don't have it yet, I think.
I think come October, when the state comes out with the tax rate, that's one of the factors that they include.
But we have
Actually, we should have the valuation, because I think we're gonna get the valuation in August. And then the tax rate comes in October. So
And I haven't seen.
I'll ask Neil.
Yeah.
So we can ask Neil to provide that information.
Well, I was not in favor of that, but if it made sense and it came out where it is, then that's a new information.
Ken, when, you know, I believe, you know, what he's saying, and to a degree, you know, what the outcome was is something to look at. But I think when we have our select board and school board meeting, this should be an agenda topic. The 10 of us getting together, have Michelle and really discuss it, because to me, it was very confusing to the public.
I agree.
And I didn't like it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
wish you would follow us.
Yeah, and I would love to be able to start early in the process with two
Yeah.
boards and really come to an agreement, because I just think since it was late in the game, but I also understand Michelle has her way of doing things. I want to respect that, since, you know, but I definitely think a healthy discussion about it between the both boards on the agenda would be great.
And I believe we're supposed to meet sometime this fall.
Yeah,
I'm not sure when. If it's been set.
hopefully before we start our budgeting process. I thought it was gonna be this month.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know which chair calls it or who plans it. So they get pretty busy in October, like you guys, so very busy now.
To your question, so we do know for the last 10 years, because we have the in between reevaluation year, there has been a reevaluation, and it's been 0.5%, 0.55%.
That's the average, right?
That's the average that it changed in between reevaluation.
And so we'll see if we have the actual number for this year. And we can also ask Neil about new housing starts and renovations, at least what the town knows of based on permitting. And So that can be information that we carry to the meeting, next meeting. And then, yeah, we leave it to you all to
Yeah, I'd like to
bring
have
that
this
into
agenda item.
conversation. And I think that's great. And I think it's an appropriate thing for the budget committee to talk about independent of the two boards and decide if we have a recommendation we want to offer.
Agreed.
All right. The only other thing I had was, I wrote down paper versus electronic. Norm, I really hate to see you
I know.
bringing 1,000 pieces of paper every month. And because I don't think many of us want all that.
You know,
And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can reduce the unnecessary expense and time that someone's spending on that.
I have an email string specifically telling someone not to print all this out, and it still was printed out. But no, I am happy to, I provide you guys digitally anyway. Some of the things that I think are 1 or 2, 3 pages, I think are appropriate, but if you really want them to be, if you want just the important documents, really, I'm all for that. But this was,
I don't think with the detailed financials we need. I mean, I think if anybody wants that, I would just encourage you to ask Norm for a printout, and I'm sure that'd be fine, but I'm not sure that should be the default.
absolutely, yeah, no, I will make sure that we don't.
So is that okay with the committee?
Yes.
Perfect.
I know it's okay with this guy. All right, any other business?
Last thing, just checks and balance. I don't think we had an approval of non-public minutes, just, I think we need that for the next meeting. That were sealed.
Oh, for the non-public
Yeah,
minutes.
so I just want to make sure for the
Meeting?
next meeting, we have just a friendly reminder, just for checks and balances.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Cindy, you remember last meeting, we went into non-public session and we had a conversation in
Yes.
non-public session. Do we have minutes from that?
No,
Okay.
was I supposed to have minutes for that? I didn't realize it.
You still have the tape that you could go back and recreate.
I don't think there's a tape on, so.
No.
I can work with
Yeah, she
you
can work with
on
you.
that, Cindy, too. I mean, I think it was a very brief conversation and I don't think it needs to be detailed minutes. So why don't I work with you and we will bring that back to the committee for the next meeting.
And they were sealed anyway too, so they're.
Do they have to be written such that they are sealed, or could they be just vague that, that we were inquiring about the health of our missing member?
At some point, they have to be unsealed, don't they? So if you
No.
got to unseal them, then you'd have to have a document.
So just, it has to say what RSA went into non-public for. And it has to explain not really much of whatever it was, and then whoever made the motion to seal it, end of discussion, and then that's it. So real quick, just so it's public record.
Norm made all the motions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll work with Cindy and with Neil to make sure that we get that down.
I might have in my written notes, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's, you didn't do
I mean,
anything
I'm
wrong.
not
I would
I didn't include
check
it
some
in
balance.
the minutes of the actual budget committee meeting. But I don't know if I wrote anything.
Okay, I can help you with
in
that.
the notes,
That's
But
fine.
I'll let you know if I do have anything.
Thanks, Norm. That was the first time we've been in non-public in
You guys.
my 5 years on the committee. All right, any other business for tonight?
Good meeting.
Not, motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good. Thanks, everybody.
Next meeting, real quick.
Next meeting is October
I think just.